Welcome to the standoff. Today we are taking a look at two different aftermarket intake systems from two very popular companies, a K&N system and the Injen SP intake system. Now both of these systems are specifically for a 2015 Subaru WRX, and we're going to go over them individually as well as comparing them head to head when it comes to their design, performance, and personal experience. I'm Gels, let's get started. First things first, let's get to know what each of these systems are by themselves. First, we're going to be taking a look at the K&N system, which we have right here. And I would say this is a pretty classic looking system from K&N when it comes to their air intakes. The tubing that you get for this one is going to be this aluminum intake tube right here. It's coated in a satin black finish. And depending on which vehicle you are getting a K&N intake for, and depending on which style you're getting, you'll either get the aluminum mandrel bent tube like this, or you're going to get what's known as the high density polyethylene or HPDE intake tube, essentially being a plastic version of this guy right here. Now when it comes to the filter for this kit, we of course have the iconic K&N filter, recognized by its burgundy color to it. And finally, for the kit that we get for the WRX, we do have this heat shield, which should help keep a lot of that radiant heat from the engine bay getting sucked in. And all of this is coming in right around $350 right now. Taking a look on the other hand here, we have the Injen SP intake system. Now Injen has a few different options to choose from when it comes to their intakes for this car. This one specifically, like I said, is the SP, and it's quite a bit different shape from the K&N that we have right here. Again, we have an aluminum mandrel bent intake tube. This one is polished instead of coated in satin black, and we get to pair that with the Injen blue intake filter right here. Similar to the K&N, we have a heat shield included as well. A little bit different style because it does sit different in the car. And right now, this one is coming in just a little bit more expensive than the K&N at $379. Now, I think it's also important to know that both of these systems are not carb legal. So unfortunately, if you live in California or a place that requires you to go through smog, you're gonna have to go with something else. And if you need help figuring out what that is, feel free to shoot us a message. We do have some carb legal intakes that we can help get to your door. So on the surface, these two systems, besides one being a little bit longer than the other, are pretty similar looking systems and come in a few dollars apart from each other. So how do you know which one you should go with for your car? Well, even though on the surface these intakes do just look like some bent tubing with some filters on them, you'd be surprised at how much differences there are between the two systems and what kind of impact that can have on not only performance of your car, but overall experience with them. One of the biggest differences right away between these two systems actually comes down to their filters. One of K&N's biggest claims to fame is their washable and reusable filters, meaning that you can clean this filter whenever you like, pretty much as many times as you want, and get a much longer life out of it. I think they have like a 1,000,000-mile like warranty or something on these, something insane. Now to be able to do this though, K&N systems are what's known as an oiled intake system. These filters are constructed from a more porous cotton material, which allows them to be washed and clean, but also allows for more airflow since the holes, I guess you would call them, are a lot bigger than your normal filter. But wouldn't that just allow more dirt and stuff to go through and not filter things? Yes, it would, but this is where that oil comes into play. Now, funny enough, the oil used in these filters isn't meant to lubricate anything. It's actually meant to coat the cotton material that's in the filters and provide kind of like a tackiness to it that helps catch any of the dust or contaminants coming in through your filter. Now, these filters come pre-oiled, which is why I'm keeping it in the package here because I don't want to get my hands all oily, because if you do pick them up, you do get kind of like a film on your fingers, which is kind of just annoying to mess around with. But of course, this means that you need to keep them maintained and re-oil them so they do what they need to do. Now, the Injen intake, on the other hand, is your standard dry filter system that doesn't require any of that maintenance like an oiled system does. However, once that filter gets dirty or is used up, you will need to swap this out instead of washing it and reusing it like the K&N one. Now, Injen uses what they call their super nano web technology when it comes to their filters. This is a special filter media inside of here that's coated in what they call a nanofiltration membrane. Now, without completely nerding out and getting too far into the weeds, it's basically just what Injen uses to do the same thing that the oil does for the K&N intake. It allows for larger pores in the material, but still filtering out all those contaminants with the coating that is on it. Now, some of the pros and cons to a dry versus oiled system. Well, with the oiled system like the K&N, you do get a lot longer life out of your filter, but that comes at the cost of making sure that it is oiled properly and remembering to actually clean it and do the things that you're supposed to do with it. Now, there's a lot of claims out there that oiled systems are really bad for things like your mass airflow sensor, which, yes, if you over oil your filter and shove a bunch in there, it will get sucked up into the intake and cause you a little bit of issues. So cool, we know what each of these systems are, but how well do they actually work? What can you expect performance-wise from each of these systems? Starting with the K&N, they promise an increase of about 9 horsepower and 18 pound-feet of torque. Now, unfortunately, in our shop here, we don't have access to a dyno and someone's WRX to throw these on to truly test that out. So we're just gonna have to go and trust the source on this one and what they claim it to be. Now, is it accurate? We'd like to hope so, but of course these numbers are typically an average, and you can expect that will vary depending on any other mods done to the vehicle, and of course even down to what temperature it is outside. But K&N, they claim 9 horsepower and 18 pound-feet of torque with this kit. Now, sound-wise, in my opinion, is also just important. The K&N does sound pretty good, and of course, anytime you open up the intake a bit and allow some more air to get into your engine, you will get a noticeable change in sound, especially with a turbocharged car like the WRX, allowing you to hear that turbo even more. Here are some examples of what this kit sounds like. Now, for the Injen intake, they have made some pretty bold claims with this system in particular. According to Injen, they have had this dyno proven with results of 17 horsepower gains with an increase of 17 pound-feet of torque. So on paper, the Injen wins. However, when searching around for some examples of what this intake sounds like or what people's initial thoughts are or just some real reactions to it, we found nothing. We can't find anything for that year WRX with this intake. Nada. Zilch. Everything we found was either for an older WRX using this system or using the Injen Evolution intake. It was a little bit different from this one. Nothing specifically for the SP intake that we have here. Now, is that telling of maybe not a lot of people like this intake? Could be, but it also is the fact that, you know, the WRX is one of the most modified platforms out there, and you have some pretty heavy hitters on the market like Cobb, Grimspeed, and Perrin, which are kind of dominating that industry. And a lot of people just tend to go with them. Either way, talking about cold air intakes and their performance gains in general is kind of a weird topic. For the most part, I will say the main reason, at least personally, you would buy an intake is to either pair it with some other aftermarket parts or just getting an increase in sound. All these companies promise these performance gains, which I'm not really gonna argue against. They definitely do help, but for the most part, you aren't gonna typically notice a huge difference out of the gate just by slapping an intake on your car. Now, still worth it, in my opinion, definitely. But when you're looking at something like the WRX specifically, parts like an up pipe, maybe some other exhaust components, and a tune are definitely gonna get you some more noticeable performance gains versus just an intake. Now, when you have all those done, or you're just looking to upgrade some sound, an intake is like the cherry on top of everything else. Now, when it comes to personal experience with each of these brands, I have personally both ran a K&N intake and an Injen intake on my vehicles. My 2004 RX-8 was fitted with the K&N Typhoon intake kit, which definitely made a huge difference when it came to the overall sound and how everything looked under the hood. However, in that case, for that specific car, I will say that intake wasn't maybe the best option for it, looking back on it now, because it just allowed so much heat soak. Now, these heat shields that they include are definitely better than having nothing, but your best bet to actually see some performance gains is to have a kit with an actual enclosure around the whole filter and moves it as far away from the engine bay as possible. We've also just recently installed an intake evolution kit on my wife's FK8 Type R, and even though that is a bit different from this one right here, I still was impressed by the overall quality of the parts and how well everything fit up to the car. Sound-wise, definitely allowed more turbo noise for the car, but nothing too over the top. It wasn't annoying by any means, and it does what an intake is meant to do, and for the most part, we're happy with it. Now, when it comes to these two systems in the matter of like a $20 difference in cost, I think your biggest decision that you're gonna have to make here is whether or not you want to go with an oiled system like the K&N or just a drop it in and let it be like the Injen. Now, something that I didn't really touch on too much either is, of course, the looks of both of these systems. Now, odds are you're gonna want something that looks good in your engine bay, and these two intakes do sit a little bit different, obviously by the size and shape of them, and depending on where it's gonna put that filter under the hood. Another thing to keep in mind too is that the Injen, of course, does come in this polished finish, but they do have some other color finishes as well. So if you're looking for like a red intake pipe, maybe you have some other red accents in your car and you want something to match that, that might be another deciding factor for you as well. So at the end of the day, armed with all of that information, the choice is truly up to you now. But of course, if you have any questions on specific intake kits for your car, whether it's a WRX or if you're just watching this in general, looking for maybe a different platform or something like that, you have some other questions, you want to figure out what's going to work best for your car, feel free to shoot us a message over at martiniworks.com. We'll be more than happy to help you out. Make sure you get the right parts the first time so you're not disappointed. That's what we're here to do in the first place. So thank you all so much for watching. This has been The Standoff. Let us know what you'd like us to compare next down below, and we'll see you later.